People think the unusual arrives with lightning, a crash, a door blown open. But the oddest events come in quiet clothing, so you don't notice them until the seams split. In rural places, a hole in the ground is not automatically a mystery. Wells are holes. Cellars are holes. Old mines become holes. Even the wrong kind of ditch becomes a hole if you leave it long enough. A hole can be useful. A hole can be safer than whatever it keeps away. And when a thing is useful, people stop asking who made it. The place later called Mel's Hole was described as narrow, vertical, and ordinary enough to be ignored. It sat on private land in eastern Washington state, near the kind of rolling country where property lines are remembered by fences and trees instead of survey stakes. The hole existed, and that was mostly that. For years, it served a purpose no one is proud of, but everyone understands: disposal, broken things, rotten things, the kind of garbage you would rather not drive into town if you can avoid it. When you live far from services, distance changes your morals. Convenience makes its own arguments, and the hole accepted what it was given. People would throw something in and listen for the sound. A dull thud. A confirmation. Gravity was still on duty. That is how trust forms, through repetition. The story's first public heartbeat came through late-night radio in the 1990s, the era when talk shows still felt like campfires, and the phone line gave a stranger a temporary chair among listeners. The man who called in did not sound like he wanted attention. He did not dress the hole in cosmic language. He did not ask for money. He did not even sound eager. He sounded like someone answering a question that had been sitting on a shelf for a long time, gathering dust. When the host asked where the hole was, the caller was careful. He described the region, the kind of roads, the surrounding land, but he did not give precise directions. Later, people treated this as suspicious, but there is a simpler reason. You do not offer strangers a path onto private land unless you want trouble. The host asked the obvious next question: how deep? The caller said he didn't know, not couldn't know, just didn't know. That answer does something to a room. It opens a space where curiosity can stand without being mocked. In surviving retellings, listeners remember a calm voice, a lack of flourish, and repeated phrases that softened claims rather than sharpened them. Deeper than you'd think, instead of bottomless. The caller explained in a plain way that they had tried measuring it once. Rope tied to a weight, lowered down slowly. When the rope ran out, they added more, then more. At some point, it became impractical, and they stopped. That could have been the end of it. Most oddities die there, at the border, where effort outweighs entertainment. But the host asked about the sound. If you drop a rock, when do you hear it hit? The caller did not answer like a man selling a miracle. He answered like a man recalling a stubborn detail. The delay didn't change much, even as they added rope. That isn't a statement of infinity, it's a statement of inconsistency. Those are not the same thing. Nothing truly changes until someone tries to reverse the relationship. Disposal is one way by design. You throw a thing away, so it is no longer your problem. You don't throw it away with plans to retrieve it later. According to the caller, someone, or perhaps several people over time, tried to hook something out. A tool dropped by mistake, a chain, a piece of equipment. The specific object shifts in the retellings, and that doesn't matter. What matters is that they tried to make the whole give back. The first attempt came up wrong in a small way. The rope seemed shorter, not cut, not frayed, just shorter, as if a portion of it had been eaten by the distance and returned with the appetite satisfied. Reasonable minds produced reasonable explanations. Knots slip. Measurements were sloppy. Human error is the universal solvent for mystery. So they tried again, this time marking the rope. Knots at intervals, tape, chalk. A crude system, but good enough to settle a question if the world cooperates. The rope came back up with its markings intact, and the spacing between them no longer matched the original intervals. Here, the story is at its most dangerous because it becomes easy to exaggerate. The disciplined version does not claim magic. It claims a failure of agreement. Different methods produced different depths. Sound suggested one distance, rope suggested another, time suggested a third. None of the results were wild. They simply refused to align. That kind of refusal is more unsettling than a single impossible measurement. If a thing breaks in a single obvious way, you can treat it as broken. If it breaks in many small ways, you don't know where to stand. Several listeners later described the story as slippery. That is not a technical term, but it is an honest one. The details never snapped into a... People asked why no one brought better equipment. Why not a measuring tape, a laser rangefinder, a camera? But those questions assumed the whole was already a public object. It wasn't. For a long time, the whole was private, and what is private is governed by unwritten rules. The most important unwritten rule was this: you don't make a spectacle on someone else's land unless you want to fight. Rural communities can tolerate eccentricity, but they have little patience for outsiders turning a neighbor's property into a circus. So the whole stayed local, spoken of in a narrow circle. People used it, grumbled about it, stopped using it, then used it again when they got tired of driving trash to town. That kind of rhythm can go on forever. The radio call changed the circle. It made the whole portable. And portability is what transforms a nuisance into a myth. As more listeners learned the name, the whole began to attract a different kind of attention. Attention that doesn't ask permission first. This is where the story's tone shifts, not into panic, but into caution. The caller is still calm, but now he speaks as though the listeners are a problem that needs managing. He mentions gates, he mentions fences, he mentions the landowner's irritation. He does not say men in black. He says something closer to reality. People started showing up. It is one thing to have a strange hole. It is another to have strangers wandering your land at night with flashlights, trying to find it. This is the part most retellings turn into cheap spectacle, so I will keep it sober. Animals had always been thrown into the hole, because animals die, and disposal is sometimes the only kindness available. But the caller described a story that disturbed people who heard it. A dead animal thrown in, and later an animal that looked like it appeared again. The reckless version calls this resurrection. The careful version calls it recognition failure. To say it came back is to make a claim about identity, and identity is hard to prove even in ordinary life. A neighbor buys a similar dog. A stray wanders in. A mistake is made. Those are the simple explanations, and they are strong. But listeners notice the detail that made the story cling to the mind. The returned animal did not behave like itself. It avoided familiar people. It kept to edges. It responded to its name as though the sound meant nothing. Not rabid, not supernatural, just wrong in a precise, unsettling way. If you have ever looked at someone you love and felt for a brief second that they were not quite aligned with their own face, you understand the feeling. It is not fear. It is betrayal by pattern. Some listeners tried to dismiss the story by saying it sounded like grief. That is a fair dismissal. Grief makes ghosts out of the ordinary. But the caller did not sound like a grieving man. He sounded like someone describing an accounting error. At this point, the hole stops being merely deep. It becomes something that complicates the idea of in and out. Once a place is described as strange, people bring their favorite tools to it. One brings religion, one brings science, one brings a camera, one brings a story they already wanted to tell. The most persistent listeners were not thrill seekers. They were tinkerers. They wanted numbers, distances, confirmation. If you listen to the surviving conversations, you hear the same loop. A method is proposed, a flaw is found, a better method is proposed, and then the chain breaks because no one can access the site. But in reconstructed accounts of local attempts, the same pattern appears again and again. The whole does not produce a single definitive result. Drop a stone and time the impact. You get one answer. Lower a weighted line and measure tension. Another answer. Use sound and echo. A third. Use a camera and you get darkness that eats light and gives nothing back. None of this proves infinity. It proves inconsistency. There's a kind of fear that comes from inconsistency because it removes your footing. With a clear danger, you can make a rule. Don't touch, don't go, don't look. With inconsistency, every rule feels provisional. So the community did what communities often do. They turned it into etiquette. Stand back. Don't lean. Don't throw certain things. Don't bring children. Don't talk about it too much. Etiquette is a way to survive a phenomenon without understanding it. Most conspiracy stories collapse into theater. They introduce shadow agents, secret files, helicopters at midnight. Those images are satisfying, but they are rarely how the world works. If any authority took interest in the whole, it was likely through the only doors authority reliably uses: liability, access, and paperwork. A dangerous opening on private land can trigger a tangle of concerns. Who is responsible if someone falls? Is it a hazard requiring mitigation? Are there environmental issues if trash is being dumped? Notice how none of those questions require the whole to be supernatural. They require it only to exist. This is why the story's most plausible form of containment is not a raid. It is inconvenience. A gate gets locked, a sign appears, an access road is regraded, a local sheriff tells someone to stop trespassing, a landowner gets tired of strangers and posts warnings. The place becomes hard to reach, and the hunger for proof starves. Bureaucracy is a quiet predator. It doesn't need drama. It only needs time. A recurring claim in later retellings is that the whole was taken over. There is no solid evidence of that, but there is evidence that access became unreliable, and unreliability is enough. Here is the most unsettling part, and it has nothing to do with physics. As the story spread, the versions did not converge. They diverged. Different listeners recalled different details with equal confidence. The location shifted, the equipment changed, the sequence of events rearranged itself. This is normal up to a point. Memory is messy. But the way these versions contradicted each other was unusual. Older details were not merely forgotten. They were replaced as if they had never been said. The caller's tone remained steady. The certainty remained, but the facts slid under it like a rug being pulled slowly across a polished floor. People tried to correct the record. They compared notes. They wrote summaries. They argued. And in the arguing, a strange thing happened. The whole became less specific and more symbolic. Bottomless replaced hard to measure. Portal replaced inconsistent. Government cover-up replaced private land and liability. This is how a story protects itself from scrutiny. It grows a costume that no longer fits any testable reality. And once a story is dressed that way, it becomes immune to disproof, and also immune to proof. Eventually, the call stopped. No grand finale, no last warning, no announcement of closure. The story simply stopped arriving, like a signal fading when the transmitter is turned off without ceremony. After that, Mel's hole lived in secondary places. Late-night conversations, lists of mysteries, forum threads where people argued over a recording they had never actually heard. The hole became portable. It could be placed anywhere. It could be claimed by any region. It could be reshaped to fit whatever fear the teller already carried. This portability is the death of a real mystery. A real mystery has weight. It has a place. It resists being moved. But the portable version is what most people remember because it requires less discipline. It is easier to say bottomless than to say our measurements did not agree. It is easier to say they covered it up than to say we lost interest. In that sense, the whole was never conquered. It was simply abandoned by attention. I will not tell you what the whole was because I don't know and I don't trust anyone who claims they do. But I can tell you what it did to the people who touched the story. It exposed how much of reality is not built on laws of nature, but on agreement. We agree on measurement. We agree on method. We agree on what counts as evidence. We agree on where a story begins and ends. For a brief time, the whole sat in a place where agreement failed without producing a clear alternative. When agreement fails, people do one of three things. Some build a myth because myth is stable. It gives the mind a shape to hold. Some build a denial because denial is also stable. It shrinks the world back to a size they can tolerate. And most people do the third thing. They move on. Moving on is not a moral failure, it's a survival strategy. But it leaves a residue, a small awareness that something once refused to line up. People often ask for a last fact. Was the hole filled? Is it still there? Did anyone ever confirm its depth? Those questions are natural. They are the mind reaching for the comfort of a closed book. The most honest answer is also the least satisfying. The whole was never confirmed to be extraordinary, and it was never confirmed to be ordinary. It lingered in the narrow corridor between, where systems do not know how to file it. If the whole still exists somewhere, it does not need guarding. It does not need belief. It does not need an audience. It only needs patience. And patience is something the earth has in abundance. If you ever find yourself near a place like that, a place that refuses to agree with your tools, remember this: the danger is not always in falling in. Sometimes the danger is in carrying the inconsistency back with you and watching it quietly rearrange the way you trust your own measurements. That is how stories like this survive. Not by proving anything, but by leaving a small splinter in the mind that can't be pulled out. And that is why I am telling you this now, carefully, from a distance, as someone who was never there, because distance is the only honest stance a story like this allows.